I want to welcome everyone to the second day of our conference, Bangladesh at 50 Beyond Rhetoric. I'm Hana Ahmed, one of the organizers of this conference, and I want to thank everyone for being here with us today. We had some excellent presentations yesterday in the two panels, and was followed by some very engaging discussions. I hope we can continue to have that today and tomorrow. So today we have two panels. The first one is State Power and Indigeneity, and the second one is Debating Popular Culture and Traditions. So before I hand it over to the moderator for the first panel, I just want to say a couple of words about housekeeping. We will be taking questions at the end of the panel after all the presentations have been made. Please post your comments in the chat box and direct it to the moderator. Sayeed Ferdous will be moderating the first panel, so you can just direct it to him. And if you want to ask a question directly, please raise your hand and the moderators will invite you to unmute yourself and ask the questions. And with that, I think I will hand it over to you, Sayeed Ferdous.
Thank you. Thank you, Hana. The session today, welcome everyone. It's Bangladesh at 50 Beyond Rhetoric, the second day, and the panel 3, second day, first panel, State Power and Indigeneity. That's the title of our panel, and 4 speakers here, Professor Mahmudul Sumon, Urak Chakma, Pablo Chapman, and Hana Ahmed. So I will invite the speakers and I will remind them after like 12 minutes, they will have 3 more minutes. Within 15 minutes, the speaker will conclude their speech. So first, I will invite Mahmudul Sumon. Mahmudul Sumon is a professor in the Department of Anthropology, Jahangirnagar University, Bangladesh. He holds a PhD from the University of Kent, UK. His doctoral work is focused on ethnicity, identity formation, and agency. He has co-edited 2 books, and forthcoming book titled Ethnicity and Adivasi Identity Politics in Bangladesh is due soon from Routledge. His current research, funded by Researching Land, deals on compensation in the wake of garments factory disasters in Bangladesh. So Mahmudul Sumon, he will talk about the discourse of indigeneity and the politics around and the CHT engagement of the states in CHT around the discourse of geopolitics. He will talk about that in his paper. Professor Sumon, you are you can start, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Sayeed Ferdous, for that introduction. The title of, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The title of my paper is The Politics of Indigeneity, the Need for a Framework Beyond Geopolitical Knowledge Production in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. I want to look at this paper as an extended case study of the CHT and its identity politics. In writing this paper, I draw from my doctoral work on Adivasi identity politics, and also from my continued interest in the region, and of course, generally my interest in identity politics pertaining to indigeneity in Bangladesh. I begin this paper by reconstructing a scene. Almost 8 years ago, with a group of anthropology students, I traveled to 2 of the districts in the CHT. Although not my first, I must say that traveling with a group of anthropology students to a quote-unquote traditional field site such as the CHT was not easy and a happy moment. Although the tour was meant for educational purpose, quite expectedly the trip soon turned into a picnic-like activity for many. While this was having a mental toll on me, I was soon exposed to a series of conversations with some government official for very practical reasons of, things like where to live and where to go, in which places to go, etc. The highly placed official promised of taking us to places in the district that he deemed as safe and within our control. Coincidentally, the official was newly appointed in the area, but I was struck to see the way he briefed us about the area where he was likely to live and work in the next few years. He spoke as if parts of the districts were under siege. But by the time I was having these conversations, some students informed me that our presence in town was already a news, and there were people who followed us for our safety, a safety that was never demanded in the first place. When I look back at these mundane incidences, I now wonder how such everyday practices of governance contributed to the idea that the CHT was under siege and needed protection. Again, all this happened 8-9 years ago. In course of my scholarly engagement with CHT, I noted how a vested group in the country, through various propaganda mechanisms, have continued to valorize the idea of the CHT as a breakaway region. I wonder if this amounts to what I'll be calling a micro-mechanism of the government, unofficial, yet effective and speaking to a majoritarian sentiment. The argument I want to make in this talk is at a discursive level and at sources of knowledge production. For too long, CHT and its ethnic politics have been looked at, discoursed, and discounted from the theoretical lenses of security and sovereignty of the state. The region continues to remain a blind spot in the majoritarian Bengali imagination. Here I stress that throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the CHT politics have been looked at predominantly from the discourses of geopolitics. In the academia, especially within the discourses of international relations, the ethnicity-based politics of the region have been seen as instances of sub-state nationalism. Taking clue from literature that critiques the mainstream discourses of security, I call for the need to bring in the idea of human security in lieu of mainstream security discourses, with the conviction that it will bring in positive contribution to security discourses, reorient dominant frames of looking at the ethnicity and ethnic conflict of the region, and move forward the dominant existing body of knowledge. While some of the key institutional contexts can be identified in perpetuating these discourses, such as Bangladesh Institute of International and Strategic Studies, an autonomous research organization founded in 1978 under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'd also like to note that much of this discourse and its knowledge production resonated in the popular writings of some of our celebrated scholars and column writers of the 80s and the 90s. When discussing the region's politics, a possible breakaway scene loomed large in much of these discourses. A couple of examples may suffice as an example of dominant frame and its effects. I'll quote here from Ahmed Sofa, who is highly acclaimed in Bangladesh. I'll quote here from Ahmed Sofa, who is highly acclaimed in Bangladeshi intellectual circles for his critical scholarship and scathing remarks on the political economy of the country. While not going into the details of his checkered career as a scholar, I'll here just briefly mention that in the wake of the peace treaty, Sofa wrote a handful of articles on CHT, and I would add in passing some very thoughtful articles on CHT situation, articles which have been later anthologized in a volume called Shanti Chukti and Selected Articles. In one such column, Sofa, while very clearly outlining the reason of the conflict in the region, pointed out, nevertheless, the CHT situation should be looked at from the geopolitics of the region. The celebrated writer, while otherwise elaborating the cause of the turmoil in the region, was very strong in flagging the point that any attempt to incorporate our country into India would be a responsibility on us to contest. Despite a very critical outlook, otherwise, the celebrated author fails to go beyond a national security and sovereignty discourse. I could go on with other snippets from SOFA, but I'll here concentrate on a different book written by Humayun Azad, who, in my opinion, was somewhat more critiqued by a later generation for his, very narrow-minded and naturalist representation of Chittagong Hill Tracts. Instead of quoting from his book on the CHT, I'll rather pay attention to a cover page of the book that titled Parbot Chattogram Shobujer Bhetor Diye Probahito Hingshar Jharnadhara, and ponder upon what meanings it generates. The book cover, of course, comes with a very important message of a flow of enmity amongst the greens of the hills, the Panctum, if you like, according to Bhattian semiotics. It is aesthetically poor, a highly subjective comment by me, shows the difficult terrains of the hill forest. The jungle troop has a long colonial history, and the struggle of a lone security personnel. The lone security personnel is seen wearing a mosquito net, most likely to get protected from the malaria. Hence, reminding the spectator the sacrifices and the hardship involving the stay in the region. The book cover generously places some photographs at the back cover of the book. I'll just repeat, where groups of people are seen sitting most likely overlooking a camera. It is difficult if they are being briefed about something, difficult to understand from these images, difficult to say because there's no mention of any details of these in these books, any description of these images. It doesn't say whose pictures are these, how were they found, was there any permission involved, nothing. From the slightly hazy picture, it appears that people depicted in these images were settlers, with perhaps one exception. While the poetics of these images cannot take us too far, I believe the politics will. What this book cover or the SOFA book cover, which I'm not going to, I don't think I have it here, shows, points to a larger structure of discourses that shapes mainstream publication of the time. It reproduces the idea of a violence-prone zone being protected by the security forces of the country. A close reading of the Bengali discourses of the day would reveal a primitive within, a concept discussed by Prathama Banerjee and something that I'll not discuss here in detail. To bring in some more discursive context to my argument, I'll draw from some ethnographic episodes from the region. In the recent past, there have been a couple of instances where this dominant frame surface and the systematic nature of the discourse suggests that it is perpetuated by the security forces of the country. One is in 2011, when the expected recognition of the ethnic groups other than the Bengalis as Adivasis didn't come through. A debate ensued at the time concerning the issue of Adivasi and its applicability in the region, in the country. Much of that debate was being published in the newspapers of Dhaka, but a small section of that debate also made headway in the then very dynamic blogosphere called Somewhere in the Blog. Our online searches indicated a concerted effort by an agency of the country hellbound to represent Adivasi politics of indigeneity as a possible case of separatist movement. It was also a period when human rights activism in the region have been attacked. Especially a CHT Commission visit in the region came under attack allegedly by Bengali settlers. It is worth noting the claims made by the Bengali settlers and the texts that followed closely matched the Sayeed government's agencies' take on the situation. Typically, the visit was seen as a conspiracy in the region. As the period 2011 ensued with a public debate about the applicability of the term Adivasi in Bangladesh, I, like some other academicians, took part in that debate. As an academic, as I argued for a constructivist approach to the naming debate, curiously, I noted that in the wake of some of these publications, I received some personal emails stating how my position was problematic and compromised state sovereignty, and how I didn't see the trap which, thanks to United Nations, gave birth to East Timor, the letter said. I'm not showing that letter here. I'm sure that such texts were not unique and haven't been sent to me alone. I think the letter I received was a standard answer for the state agency at that time. Texts and pamphlets and handbills spread often by unidentified people during those days in rallies calling for recognition of the term Adivasi in the run-up to the 15th Amendment often reproduced the same anxiety of state sovereignty. Attack on the CHT Commission people and declaring them as persona non grata through hoisting banners and other means of propaganda needs to be looked at in the background of this political context.
Professor Sumon, the very last minute.
Okay, thank you. It is my argument that despite many contending discourses present in the CHT, the state through its various ISAs and other apparatuses continue to reproduce CHT as a monolith, as a no-go area, different, other, and dangerous, but safe only when guarded by the army. The state through its ideological apparatus have successfully created a situation where the settlers and hill people increasingly find them in an antagonistic situation. Finally, I wish to point out that the purchase of geopolitical discourses does not hold anymore for the CHT. In recent years, the CHT people have been represented in the government, and there's clearly a demography that suggests that the percentage of people other than the Bengalis in the CHT, the percentage of people living in Dhaka, indigenous people, is on the rise. With rise of education, the demography is overall changing. Thus, finally, I would like to conclude that scholars and as scholars and researchers, we need to delve into new forms of knowledge production that shy away from the archetypical notion of substate nationalism, which preoccupied scholars of the yesteryears. Also, it is important to shy away from archetypical notion of the hill people and take into consideration how hill people intend to represent themselves. There's already examples of newer forms of identity articulation that negates a monolithic idea of the Adivasi, an emerging critique from the youth on how they have been represented for long and how they wish to be represented. As scholars and researchers and activists, it is outpost important that we take note of these developments and embark upon a knowledge production that helps dismantle the all-powerful security discourses and show paths to conviviality, proximity, and human security. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sumon, for this important and interesting presentation. And I'm sure the floor will bring up issues and will share their views and engage with you. The 4 papers of this session, I must say that all is around the issues of CHT. And the first 2 of Professor Sumon and Urak Chakma, these 2 papers are around discourses related to CHT, and the next 2 following 2 papers, the last 2 papers of the session, will deal with the specific instances of the power relation in CHT. So yeah, it's interesting to see, like Professor Sumon was talking about the discourses of indigeneity and how we should shy away from the geopolitical discourses and these things. Now I'm inviting the second speaker of this session, Urak Chakma. I can see that he is here. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Dhaka. Currently, Anurug is doing his PhD in the School of Politics and International Relations at the Australian National University. Anurug, he will talk about the relationship between political security with life satisfaction in CHT. So, Urak Chakma, please present your great paper.
I think Anurug recently received his PhD.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that.
Actually,
thank you for enlightening.
I did my final presentation on 26th November. Yeah. So I had to also address the comments I received from reviewers. So thank you very much, Honorable Editor, Professor Sayeed Ferdous sir, for inviting me to present my research now. Good morning from Canberra, Australia. So I'm Urak Chakma, as you already know about my introduction. I'm an assistant professor, University of Dhaka, and PhD candidate, Australian National University. In my PhD research, I'm seeking to explain does political security matter? A study on the life satisfaction of indigenous peoples of the Chittagong Hill Tracts. I would like to begin my presentation with some media narratives to make you understand from where my research question has originated. And this is the slide about the identity crisis of the indigenous peoples of Bangladesh. And as we know, the Chittagong Hill Tracts conflict is also widely known as identity conflict. And in the second slide, and which is, one of the dominant narratives now about the land grabbing and displacement of indigenous peoples, and how the right to land, traditional land, is being violated by the state agencies, sometimes private companies, and even powerful political persons. And this is the picture that talks about how the freedom of movement, freedom of assembly is being violated by the military. And militarization is one of the largest the freedom of movement of indigenous peoples of the Chittagong Hill Tracts. And actually, the human rights situation is very worse for the indigenous peoples who are living in the CST, says indigenous leader and the chairman of the PCJSS, Shuntularma. And similar kinds of concern is reflected in the Amnesty International report. As you see the headline of the report, Indigenous Rights Denied in Bangladesh, Chittagong Hill Tracts. And the thing is that what could we imagine if your rights are violated by the state? And it might be explained from different theoretical perspective, but in this paper, my concern is, my focus is on the life satisfaction of indigenous peoples. Let's have a look in the next slide. And this is the quote I cited from the research, which is written by Professor Nasiruddin and Eva Garhatz. And from this quote of an interviewee, you can easily understand that how people are dissatisfied with their lives because of violation of denial of their fundamental rights and freedoms. And in this quote, an interviewee told to the Professor Nasiruddin and Eva Garhatz that how militarization is affecting their lives, day-to-day lives, and how torture is going on in the GST. And if you move to this slide, and this is a quote I cited from the report of Amnesty International, and indigenous women was interviewed, and she told that the fires began because of the ongoing tensions between Paharis and Bengalis. And the thing is that if you please look at the last two words, marginal and vulnerable, these two words presents a powerful story of their dissatisfaction with their lives. And so drawing on these slides, media reports, and the existing research, I have developed my research question. How does political security influence the life satisfaction of indigenous peoples of the GST? This is not my part of the PhD research project. Basically, I conducted this research before coming to Australia. And from this research question, you could see my independent variable is political security, and my dependent variable is life satisfaction. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about my independent variable and dependent variable. And what is political security? Actually, UNDP report 1994, which was published, and in this report, it was published that there are 7 elements of human security, and one of them is political security. Actually, UNDP defines political security as the protection of human dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. Following existing definition of the UNDP, I defined the concept of political security in this research as the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms of indigenous peoples. More precisely, in this research, I operationalized this concept as the protection of political rights, because I'm not looking at socioeconomic rights in this study. Just for narrowing down the scope of this research, I'm just focusing on political rights. And my dependent variable is life satisfaction. Existing research has applied two dominant approaches. Sometimes they ask respondents a single question about the assessment of their subjective life satisfaction. And there is another approach, that is multiple question approach. They ask several questions about how people evaluate their life satisfaction. And following the existing measures, basically, I applied a single question approach, and I operationalized life satisfaction question, asking a single question to respondents, like Gallup and World Value Survey and many other, even American National Election Survey. They ask this sort of questions. Considering all things, can you please indicate your overall life satisfaction these days on a scale of 0 to 10 point, where 0 refers to completely dissatisfied, 10 to completely satisfied. And to explain the causal relationship between political security and life satisfaction, I developed a framework drawing insight on political science literature on life satisfaction, which is limited to three broader themes. One is the role of democracy, which is related to the political regime, how political regime influences life satisfaction, and how political participation is related to the life satisfaction, and how the quality of government affects life satisfaction. And in the case of GST, these three bodies of literature are relevant, because in terms of democracy, as we know, Chittagong Hill Tracts is heavily militarized and people are denied of their democratic rights in their day-to-day life. And on the other hand, the existing research like Halliwell and Huang, Binhuben, Radcliffe, and they find in their research that when rule of law, I mean the governance indicators, rule of law and many other indicators are associated with life satisfaction. When rule of law increases, the life satisfaction of the people goes up. On the other hand, people who live in democratic countries and have access to political freedoms are more happier than those individuals who live in non-democracies. On the other hand, existing research shows that democracy increases life satisfaction and happiness in two ways. One is it has psychological impact. On the other hand, policy outcome of democracy contributes to the life satisfaction. And the second body of literature, political participation and life satisfaction. And in terms of life satisfaction, political participation matters because as we know, even if I come outside the CST context, people are dissatisfied in our country because they have low level of political participation. And as we see in the media narratives and in other research, that people don't have access to, formal and conventional political participation, like they have no right to the exercise their vote. So how political participation really matters for the life satisfaction in democratic country. So in case of the Chittagong Hill Tracts, because it's part of the whole system. So whereas the political participation is very worse nationally, so in the TST the case is very worse. And another body of research talks about the quality of governance. Basically three fundamental factors: trustworthiness, how much do you have trust on your government, how much your government is responsive to your demands and political rights, how much you have better access to the public service. So these issues affect the life satisfaction. And actually in media, even in research, we see that people are dissatisfied because they do not have access to public service, and they do not have trust on the government, the officials. So people are dissatisfied. And based on this literature review, theoretical framework, I developed 8 hypotheses. The first one is indigenous peoples who think they enjoy the right to identity are more likely to be satisfied with their lives, in contrast to those indigenous people who feel the denial of this right. And the second hypothesis is about the right to the traditional lands. And the third hypothesis is the indigenous people who think that, who have positive perception that they can exercise their right to vote, are more likely to be satisfied with their lives, in contrast to those indigenous people who feel that they are deprived or denied of this fundamental right. And the fourth hypothesis is about the right to the liberty. And the fifth hypothesis is indigenous people who perceive that they enjoy their freedom of movement, they are more likely to be satisfied with their lives, as opposed to those indigenous people who feel that they are denied of this right. And the sixth hypothesis is about the freedom of association. And the hypothesis 7, as you can see from the slide, about the right to participation in decision-making process. And hypothesis 8 is basically about the right to protest, whether indigenous people can exercise this right.
Anurug, the
Yes.
very last minute.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So and this is my method. Actually, I have conducted the survey research, and this is as I mentioned about my independent variables, the fundamental rights, and control variables are socio-demographic variables. Dependent variable is life satisfaction. And this is my sample. Actually, I'm skipping here. And I have used descriptive statistics and ordinary least square regression to for my empirical analysis. And this is the descriptive statistics. And from this slide, you can see that the people in indigenous people have negative perception about their political security. That means they have very low level access to this right to identity, right to traditional land, right to vote, right to liberty, and right to protest and freedom of movement, these rights. And basically, this is my main empirical analysis. And from this empirical analysis, as you can see, I have used two models of ordinary least square regressions. And I have used pink color for model 1 and blue color for model 2. And the difference between these two models is that I have used control variable in model 2. I didn't use control variable with predictors in model 1. And from this figure, you can see actually right to liberty, right to vote, freedom of movement, and right to participation are statistically significant predictor of life satisfaction of indigenous peoples of the Chittagong Hill Tracts. And this is the predicted marginal effect of political security on life satisfaction. And you can see right to identity, right to liberty, and freedom of association, freedom of movement, and right to participation, and right to protest. These actually, the people who feel that they have these rights, they are more satisfied as opposed to those indigenous people who feel the denial of these rights. And you might have a question about why should we care of this study. Basically, my study contributes to policy as well as theory. In terms of the theoretical contribution, I would like to tell you that no studies exist to explain whether political security matters for life satisfaction of indigenous peoples. On the other hand, in terms of policy contribution, I would like to tell on the drawing insight on this study that the government as well as international community should have a particular focus on the political security to develop even for the policy intervention on the indigenous peoples. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And thank you. And I'm looking forward comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, we have to be strict about the time because there is this time limitations and those things. And I'm sure that the audience will listen to your presentation. Now I am going to invite Pablo Chapman, who's a PhD candidate in International Development Studies at the Institute of Development Research and Development Policy, Ruhr-University, Bochum, Germany. His current study focuses on survival strategies of Tanjanga peasants in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, Bangladesh. His research interests include survival strategies, resistance, human rights, identity politics, and indigenous peoples issues in general. So Bablu, yes, as we can find from your bio, the specific Bablu is looking at a specific market relation that has been practiced in CHT. It's the Dadan. It's a particular kind of contract and loan and money lending contract, which has been taking place there among the Bangladeshi intermediaries and peasants, Tanjanga peasants. So Bablu, floor is yours.
Sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties in relation to sharing my screen. So maybe I'd like to request someone else from the organizers to share the screen, please.
So can you continue without it for a few minutes and I'll download it and I'll share it. Is that okay?
Just the privacy setting is not allowing me. So
Oh, you should be a host and should be able to share it, but we'll look into it.
it's a computer that's not allowing me.
Oh, I see.
I don't know where exactly it is. I did it before, but
okay, I have the you sent me the PDF. I can share that. It's a PDF of your PowerPoint. Yeah, let me try and do that. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Sorry that I don't know what happened. Like I did it before, but somehow it happens. No, that's
fine. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
So, welcome to my presentation, everybody. My paper deals with a very kind of micro-political aspect of life in this Chittagong Hill Tracts, which is titled Everyday Politics of Dadan Contracts and Price Differences in the Chittagong Hill Tracts of Bangladesh, which I'm writing as a part of my PhD. So, okay, yeah. So the objective of the paper is to analyze the processes of negotiations between capitalist Bengali intermediaries and indigenous Tanchunga Kulantro or Bilati Dhoniya growers over Dadan contracts and price differentials arising from such contracts. So these kind of contracts are known as interlocked market relationships in economics. So as you can see, it's a form of economic relationship. However, bringing in anthropological perspectives, I would like to contribute from two perspectives. First is to bring about not just economic, but also extra economic aspects of such contracts. And then to highlight on the strategies in relation to such contracts that both of these groups employ. Next, yeah. So what are Dadan contracts? Dadan contracts are an oral agreement between a grower and an intermediary, where the grower issues an advance amount of money to the intermediary issues an advance amount of money to the grower. When a grower enters such contract, becomes obligated to sell his or her produce, which means kulantro, to this particular intermediary. But there is no explicit interest rate for such advance or credit. However, there is a price differential, which means the line rate and market rate are not the same. Here, line means the artificial market space created by such intermediaries, or those who provide Dadan. So in order to capture this social phenomenon, I used the concept of everyday politics, which you know that was introduced or propagated by scholars such as James Scott and Michael Addis, who highlighted on acts such as, which are anonymous, mundane, dispersed, and covert kind of acts. Of course, this has developed further, and for example, Johansson and Windhagel used the rapporteur concept of James Tilley and used it in analyzing such everyday aspects of everyday politics. And following them, I, in this paper particularly, focus on not only just resistance, but also acts of compliance and avoidance when analyzing the Dadan contracts. And this phenomenon is taking place in the context of the Chittagong Hill Tracts, which you all know that is situated in the southeast part of Bangladesh, where 14 indigenous peoples live, and aside from Bengalis. These indigenous communities once were substantially or mainly dependent on Zoom or shifting cultivation, which is a subsistence-oriented and form of production and way of life, and also it's based on reciprocity. So British colonial officials introduced plough cultivation, private land ownerships, and reserve forest, among other policies, which actually had negative impacts on such economies, reciprocity and subsistence-based economies. And afterwards, post-colonial states of Pakistan and Bangladesh introduced destructive development projects. They also introduced militarisms, settler migration, as a result of, or in relation to such developments or policy changes, there was this region or these people underwent a period of indigenous insurgency or armed conflict, armed resistance. So what I'm arguing in this paper is that as a result of all these, developments, two major shifts have taken place. One is to shift from subsistence-oriented economies to market-dependent economies. Then the other one is now the markets are not actually dominated or controlled by the indigenous peoples, but by the Bengalis. So zooming into my case study, a village named Mayachura, where a village of indigenous Tonchunga peasants, where I did my ethnographic field study in 2019. There I found that these indigenous peasants need credit for two main purposes. One is agricultural reproduction, especially because this culantro or bilati dhania is a capital intensive crop. Secondly, they need credit for social reproduction, especially when they're in disparate consumption needs and exigencies and their need for investment in some petty entrepreneurship. They do have some access to institutional sources of credit like NGOs or banks, but Dadan is still a popular source of credit in this region for these people. Okay, thank you. So this Dadan credit is offered in the beginning of a culantro season, during December and January. So once once a grower or a peasant enters such contracts, they become dependent on or they become obligated to abide by the intermediary imposed culantro price throughout the season or until the payment of the Dadan. And as I said, there is this difference between this line rate and open market rate as a result of Dadan contracts. Now, this difference between these two rates creates the question of justness of the price. So how wide the gap between the Dadan and the open market rate can be? Generally, people accept that there can be a 10 taka difference per kilogram. However, in reality, it's never 10 taka, but more. Sometimes it can be even 7, 8 times more in practice. So now the question is, how do these intermediaries maintain control over these growers? First, they employ growers themselves as agents or wage workers or auto drivers for such to support this Dadan process, including monitoring and implementation of the terms of such contracts. The intermediaries also maintain warm relationship with these growers through everyday interactions, through visits, through sharing meals, or they can even invite them for, say, for example, during Eid or other occasions. So they maintain in that way. The second one is to use the market mechanisms. So these Bengali intermediaries have actually monopoly over larger culantro markets, while these Tonchonga growers do not have access to these larger markets. So there is this power discrepancy or discrepancy in terms of access, which allows the intermediaries to use different excuses or for including the excuse of Arab price to maintain or control the price locally. So because they don't have any information, that growers cannot challenge such price or such excuses, which are happening in larger markets in Dhaka or Chittagong or somewhere else. So they also maintain these intermediaries also maintain a cartel of cartel, or locally known as syndicate, which helps them to maintain one single agreed upon rate, known as line rate, which, as I said, never corresponds to the changes in the open market rates. So even if the market rate is, say, running at 100 taka per kilogram, this rate may be at 50 or 40 taka. So these intermediaries also can involve local political actors. So when there is a breach of a contract, those intermediaries can go for social and economic sanctions, including invoking arbitration or local arbitration or salish bichar, which can involve local political actors. And often the verdicts or the rulings from such courts actually go in favor of the intermediaries. As a result of that, the growers become forced to return their Dadan money or even face humiliation locally. Now, the final one is to keep this Dadan money readily available to the growers. So Dadan contracts actually do not end with one kulantro season, but go on for season after season or year after year. Of course, sometimes the growers do fail to pay. Firstly, because there may be different kinds of failure in terms of agricultural reproduction, including crop failure. But there is a voluntary aspect as well, which is due to the intermediaries' policy of discouraging the growers not to repay the whole amount so that they can retain their growers. So because of that, these growers actually feel not encouraged to return the whole money because they get the Dadan money when they ask more. So they become trapped in perpetual indebtedness. Now the peasants also follow some strategies. Next, please. So the first one is, of course, to comply. Generally, most growers comply. So one is, this is also because of some practical reasons why they comply. First is it's very convenient for them to sell at farm gate, and the demand from this Dadan providing intermediaries is quite secure. And there is, of course, this moral obligation of keeping the words. Once you enter the contract, you keep the word. So that's one of the reasons. The second one is that they can surreptitiously or covertly sell some of their produce to the growers, to other intermediaries. This happens particularly when the market rate becomes too high, while the line rate doesn't change much. Then in such cases, they can sell at farm gate to unidentified intermediaries covertly or without revealing that. But they never sell actually this fully. They never sell their produce fully because they need to satisfy this intermediary, those providing Dadan to satisfy them or keep them satisfied. But they also can sell in small amounts in the local market places like 5 kilograms or 10 kilograms, which never become to the notice of the intermediaries, those who provide Dadan. Now, the third one is the avoidance. Those who can have this capacity, they can avoid such contracts. Of course, when they can avoid, they enjoy the flexibility and autonomy in terms of selection of the buyer or the selection of the market, or they have other advantages. And they, of course, get competitive market rate when they can sell in such way. However, face the inconvenience in terms of product supply. The second one is they lack a patron in terms of crisis and exigencies, while others, those who take Dadan, they have someone beside them when they face crisis. Also, they have to.
Bablu,
Yes.
Will you please wrap up?
Yes. Okay. So they can also they may have to adopt their consumption patterns. I'm almost finishing. Yes. So they can go for open confrontations, which are rare. So in that cases, they can even lead to breakup of relationship. So finally, in conclusion, I wanted to say that this kind of contracts, micro-political kind of contracts, are rooted in broader social and historical developments of the region. The negotiations that here actually involve multiple actors' relationships and social processes. However, the growers become dependent concerning credit and product supply when they enter such contracts, and they become perpetually indebted to these intermediaries. When they do follow some strategies, they are often accommodative and covered in nature. So that's from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bablu, and thank you, everyone, for your patience. We are running a bit late. It's not. I have no problem to allow the speaker more time, but the problem is, we really want the floor to respond. So that time is squeezing gradually. Our last presenter to this session, Hana is a PhD candidate of social anthropology at York-University, Canada. She has an MA in sociocultural anthropology from the University of Western Ontario and an MA in development studies from Urak University, Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, she has worked with the advocacy body International Chittagong Hill Tracts Commission for more than 10 years. Hana Shams Ahmed, please present your paper.
Actually, there are two presenters here. So I'm presenting with Mukti Chakma, and I'll just say her bio as well. We're doing this research together. Mukti Chakma has a master's in international development from Flinders University, Australia, and an LLB from Dhaka University. And Mukti has worked and researched on development and advocacy for more than 10 years. I will just share the PowerPoint presentation and then I'll start. Just give me a moment. Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint? Everyone can see?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
All right, just one more second. Sorry, too many screens, too many things to look at. All right, so thank you, Sayeed Bhai, and thank you everyone for being here today. So Mukti Chakma and I are going to present some initial thoughts on a research that we're doing. And because of the special situation of the hill tracts, as well as the ongoing pandemic, I'm using a collaborative approach in my PhD fieldwork, and it's still at a preliminary stage. So the research looks at the power and politics behind the 22,000 complaints that were submitted to the Land Dispute Resolution Commission of the Chittagong Hill Tracts. And we want to look at the power, politics, and the performative of these complaints. So in the first part, Mukti Chakma will talk about the formation and evolution of the Land Commission from the signing of the CHT Peace Accord in 1997 to the present day. In the second part of the presentation, I will discuss the political aspects of the commission and the complaints in the context of the Bangladeshi state's relationship with the minoritized Jumma communities. Okay, over to you, Mukti.
Thank you, Appa. Okay. When it comes to the topic of Land Dispute Resolution Commission, hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We hear you.
Okay. When it comes to the topic of Land Dispute Resolution Commission, we can divide it into three separate aspects. The first aspect is the commission itself, known as Land Dispute Resolution Commission, which was formed in 1999 following the CHT Accord of 1997. The second aspect is the Land Dispute Resolution Commission Act, which was initially passed in 2001 and amended in 2016. And the third one is the set of rules which is supposed to make the Commission and the Commission Act operational. However, it is still trapped inside the Ministry of Land for its approval since 2019. So what is the Land Dispute Resolution Commission? The concept of Land Commission was formed to ensure justice for the Jumas of the Hill Tracts who were dispossessed from their ancestral lands. This concept was acknowledged through the CHT Accord of 1997. The code clearly instructs the formulation of a land commission to settle land disputes in the hills and to cancel the illegal settlements in the region. The commission would consist of 5 members. They are a retired judge of Supreme Court as the chair, and as members, there are the chairperson of regional council, the respective circle chief, the Chittagong divisional commissioner, and the respective district council chairperson. The most important part of settling the land disputes by the commission is that it should be settled in accordance with the region's existing rules, customs, and practices. In Bengali, পার্বত্য চট্টগ্রামের প্রচলিত আইন, রীতি ও পদ্ধতি. The struggle the Commission Act had before and after its amendment in 2016. The Awami League government passed the Land Dispute Resolution Act 2001 shortly before handing over its power to a caretaker government, however, without consulting local Juma leaders. As a result, the act was left with several loopholes that had the potential to obstruct a just approach to resolving the land disputes. It was only in 2009, when Awami League came to power again, that the local Juma leaders appealed to the government to amend the act. After a lengthy series of meetings in 2012, all the parties ended up with a draft of 13 recommended amendments that are likely to ensure justice in land disputes. In the meantime, settler Bengali organizations protested, saying that this would violate their rights. In addition to that, the Land Ministry itself stated that giving authority to the Land Commission to resolve land disputes would be a threat to the sovereignty of the state. It wasn't until 2016 that Awami League government finally agreed upon the law, which in general reflects the demand negotiated by the Juma leaders. However, Bengali protest is still ongoing against the amended Act of 2016. So what are some changes that took place in the Commission Act of 2016? The amendment of 2016 gives the Commission the power to resolve the disputes of illegal settlements and forcibly enforced lands, along with the lands that belong to the India returning refugees. In 2016 amendment, the 2016 amendment called for the word practice or paddhati, so the disputes will be resolved by the Commission based on the CHT's existing rules, customs, and practices. The word practice or paddhati plays a vital role in the land management system in the context of the CHT, as the region's law differ from the rest of the country. Some other clauses among the amendments made the progress more democratic, by giving circle chiefs the authority to nominate a representative in their absence, and took away the sole authority of the commission's chairperson to give verdicts in land disputes. The portions of submerged lands get exposed during the dry season, known as fringe land, have also brought under the jurisdiction of the Commission. The Commission can nullify all the illegal settlements and occupations on the fringe lands. Now, what is the current state of the Land Commission? The formation of the Commission was undoubtedly a hope for the Juma people. However, in practice, the Commission has still remained a non-functional entity with only 11 meetings conducted so far from late 2016 to until COVID-19 hit in early 2020. Many of the Juma leaders have, however, told us that this delay has been a source of hopelessness and frustration among the Jumas. A traditional chief of a village, who is generally known as Karvari, one of these Karvaris, who is also an applicant himself, told us that he does not trust the government any longer. To him, the government has just been procrastinating by giving empty promises to the Juma people. He believes that if the government had honest intention, the Commission would have already started its proceedings. The reality is that even if the Commission initiates the proceedings, it will definitely face multi-sectoral or multi-layered political obstacles. So that's all from my part. Thank you. Over to you, Hana.
Thank you, Mukti. So in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, land disputes are layered and complicated because of the multiple different ways that dispossession has taken place throughout the region and the multiple political actors and interests that are involved in the process. This process started during colonial times through the biopolitical project of enclosures, which involved designating certain areas as reserve forests and thereby controlling Juma people's access to the natural resources that had been part of their life and culture at the time. In the last 50 years, this project has gained further momentum through an aggressive state-led project, which included a transmigration program, setting up of various forms of extractive industries under the patronage of the Bangladeshi political elite, and in recent times through tourism. What many scholars and local indigenous leaders and activists do agree upon is that the future of the region and the outcome of the peace accord will be assessed by how land disputes in the region are resolved. And how land is dealt with by the state is also an indication of how the state positions Jummas within the national rhetoric. In many places where colonization has led to land dispossession of the original inhabitants, official land acknowledgements have become an important, however tokenistic, way of recognizing the violence inflicted upon original inhabitants of a region. However, even that kind of recognition is far from the case in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. While the importance of land in the life and livelihood of Jummas may vary according to their individual class background and occupation, for many Jummas, land is still an important part of the everyday. Stories and memories of lost land exist regardless of class background of Jummas. In Urak Chakma's oral history work, Kaptai Bad Borporong, on the refugees of human-made disaster, the Kaptai Dam, many of the Jumma elders spoke about how families were split apart through this process of uprooting. Family members did not know for many years what their own siblings looked like. One Jumma elder spoke about the non-human impact of the dam, where the birds and other animals of the region behaved in unnatural ways. The formation of the Land Commission and the amendments of the law to include language that promises to resolve disputes by respecting customs and practices was thus seen as a step forward toward a possible historical reparation. Of course, the 22,000 complaints submitted to the Commission is neither reflective of the true extent of the land dispossession in the region, nor does it explain the various ways that it has taken place. And it certainly does not explain the meaning of submitting these complaints in a climate of fear and intimidation. While the 70s and 80s transmigration program was the big state-led process that officially legitimized the evictions of Jummas from their land, since then the process have been far from straightforward. The dispossession in this region is a manifestation of a nationalist and racist project, capitalist exploitation, and administrative corruption. The official transmigration program ended with the signing of the accord, but the ongoing discourses of Jummas as threats to the sovereignty of the state, the othering and the demonizing of Jumma political activists continue to this day. Something that Dr. Shaponadnan mentioned yesterday and also Sumon today. These discourses combined with administrative corruption and the state's technology of fear and surveillance has helped to develop a very fertile ground for land dispossession. The Land Commission has the legal authority of a tribunal to resolve land disputes. It is an official legislative body that can give a verdict about the ownership of the piece of land. The act of submitting a complaint to the Commission is an assertion of the power to negotiate with the state. The complaints represent hope for reparations, but as we have found from our research, it would be misleading to think of this submission as simply an expression of hope. Local leaders who are part of the petitioning of the Land Commission do not tell us a simple narrative of these complaints. The complaints to the Commission on the one hand are made with a sense of hope. There are Jummas who have been through the courts for decades with their cases never being heard. That applicants have been told that the LDRC, the Commission, the Dispute Commission, would give quick resolutions to their complaints. However, many are also skeptical, as Mukti mentioned, and simply submitted complaints because they have been asked to by activists. Local leaders have expressed that many applicants have not even saved a copy of their application. For some, it is not hope, but a sense of duty that compelled them to submit the complaint. For yet others, more minute?
Yeah, you should, you can wrap up, yeah.
Okay. For yet others, it is an assertion of their power and political agency to make demands of the state within historically entrenched inequalities of power and an attempt of negotiation between those who govern and those who are governed. So to understand the 22,000 complaints or abedons that have been submitted to the Land Dispute Resolution Commission, it is important to understand what land means to different political agents in the hills, as well as the positioning of the Jumma within its political and geographical history. Land means different things to different political actors who are involved in the region, where land is a site of post-colonial formation. I had a paragraph about what this means for different political actors, but I think maybe I can talk about this in the discussion. I'll come back to that. So anyway, as I mentioned, this is a research project that is a work in progress. We're looking at the phenomena of the 22,000 complaints that have been submitted to the Land Commission. To analyze how Jumma articulate their claims to land in their negotiations with the state, and what are the power dynamics in these negotiations among the different groups, and how the state responds to these appeals. And what we presented today is simply a premise of our research so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Hana and Mukti. Mukti, very sorry. I somehow, I don't know why I have missed your name. I'm very sorry for that. Hana, can you please stop sharing the screen so that I can see all the participants, and please raise your hand if you have any question, or leave the question in the comment box or chat box. Yeah. So if there is anyone have any question. Well, I cannot see any hand raised. Yeah, Ferdous and Shaponadnan. First, I am asking Ferdous to unmute, and yeah.
Okay, since nobody else is asking questions, I'll go first. I had thought I'd wait to listen for people's responses, but it's fine to to go ahead with what has been said. So I have questions for Pablo Chapman and for Hana, Shams Ahmed and Mukti Chakma. For Bablu, Bablu, you will be familiar with these questions because I've raised these earlier. One is that you need to explain why the Tonchonga peasants still go to these Mahajans, these Bengali Mahajans, even though there are institutional sources of credit available. I know that you have good reasons for this, but it would be good if you did explain this. You also mentioned the use of gifts, and it's important that the gifts are seen as one-way gifts, kind of patronage to clients, rather than the kind of gifts that Moss and others have discussed, where I also bored you that a gift requires a return gift and so on. This is different, and this is much more instrumental. And why do they not challenge? You say that it's rare. Question is why, is it possible to explain why there isn't that much challenge? And what happens if they do challenge? You didn't have time at the very end, but I think if you can mention, discuss the collective silence of the rest of the community when breaches are made, and also the kind of sanctioning when people are actually taken to Shalish and so on. On the paper by Hana and Mukti Chakma, most of the discussion has been about the complaints made by Paharis. But I remember when, as a member of the Chittagong Hill Tracts Commission, I had gone to the region in 2009 and 10, and people were submitting their complaints. One thing which struck us was also that there were many complaints by Bengali settlers. And I had to look through some of these complaints, and two striking patterns. One was that many of these were complaints about lands which belonged to Buddhist temples, to the Khiangs, and also to orphanages, Buddhist orphanages. And it was interesting why, this was taken up. There may be a reason for it, and I'll come to it through my second point. The second point was that I looked through literally dozens of applications made by Bengali settlers. And there was this story that we had been given land by the government in the mostly in the early 1980s, but we had to go away because there was this war, the Shanti Bahini was attacking us. Now that there is peace, so this is after the peace accord, we find that our land given to us by the government has been occupied by the Paharis. This is the standard kind of text. Now, that's not very unusual. I mean, it's not unexpected that you'll get a story like that. What is unexpected is that literally all the complaints have the same wording, Aki Bhasha. And so if you can think of it, hundreds of complaints by Bengali settlers with identical language. Now, what that suggests, in the absence of any direct evidence, is that there was some kind of coordination behind the scenes. Some agency possibly had been at work producing the script, the template, which would be used for these complaints. So I thought that you need to also perhaps highlight that aspect of what is happening with the land commission, because it is not just the Paharis who are hoping for to regain their lost land. It is also the Bengali settlers who, perhaps in some cases through no faults of their own, were taken to the hill tracts, also hoping that the government will somehow allow them to get back their lands.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think there are three hands at a row, and I think we questions from all three of them. Firoz Alam next, and Samina Lutfa. So Firoz.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. My question previously regarding the Dadan, I was wondering that, did Bablu see that in places like that, Bangladeshir microfinance, let's say Grameen, whether they operate there and what kind of relationship, if at all, how does it work? Second, I would say a question to Hana and Mukti. In terms of the resistance, could you talk about Bangladesh, the nationalistic discourses of Bangladesh? How I know I can imagine that obviously the history of marginalizing indigenous peoples in Bangladesh would be suppressed for nationalistic and many reasons. In order to build resistance, have you seen a kind of progress in the centers, let's say Dhaka, where people, by creating critical consciousness, they're raising voice, building solidarity for advancing the resistance for the justice of indigenous peoples?
Okay, thank you, Firoz. Yeah, Samina Lutfa.
Thank you for giving me the chance. Thanks to all the 4 presentations. Just one question to all of the presenters. Given the fact that Bangladesh government kind of do not agree with the fact that we have indigenous people, quote unquote, how do you situate your analysis of indigeneity in Bangladesh?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Fourth hand, and I'm taking it in a row. Same rule, because I'm afraid we are not going to take like another round of questions. So it's better to take the fourth, Rosa Mendoza. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to make my question. My question is for everybody or anyone who can respond. I'm so glad that there is a table about indigenous issues in this conference, but I was surprised that all the papers have to do with Chittagong Hill Tract, and there is nothing about the plainlands. Can you have any thoughts about why is that happening? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rosa. Maybe one of the organizers, probably Hana, is there. Yeah, we can have an explanation for that. But yes, first I will ask Bablu to respond the questions directed to him, and then Hana and Mukti, and then Anurug and Mahmudul Sumon. Yeah, unfortunately, we only have 4 minutes in the schedule. We can take, we can borrow 5 more minutes from the break. Yeah, so it will be 9 minutes together altogether. So Bablu first.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your wonderful questions, and they're very important. Professor Chapman has raised very few important questions which I didn't address, although my paper addresses at least some of them. So first one is why they still go for Dadan. I think one of the main reasons is to get it at, its convenience, first of all. Like they can access this Dadan almost whenever they want, when they have some, the possibility of farming culantro. So there is this possibility, so they can go for that. And after that, actually, they become gradually dependent. So I think it's the dependency that kind of keep them within the kind of the circle of this Dadan. So they go for year after year or season after season. The gifts, I do agree. It's a patronage, and it's kind of separate, different from the Mausian kind of gift. Then the why not challenge? I actually outlined some of the control mechanisms that I call. One of them is, of course, say engagement of the political actors who kind of are involved in such contracts, or when they've go for such the intermediaries go for such interventions from the political actors, they become kind of forced to repay their Dadan. So it's kind of a control that is working. One of the reasons why they don't challenge, and because they once they go for challenging these intermediaries, they may even their possibility of getting further Dadan or credit money stops, so they don't get anymore. So it's one of the reasons. So there are other reasons as well, which if I get time, I can explain later. Microcredit, yes, there are, of course, as I mentioned, there are some NGOs who provide microcredit. However, what I've observed in the field is that microcredit is not so popular, which it used to be, but people have moved to other sources. So one of the main institutional source, if you like, is the state kind of initiative of Amar Bari Amar Khamar project, which is more convenient than these microcredits. So people often refer to this source as one of their important sources. Maybe the indigeneity issue, I don't know if I should be answering them as well, because they're to the all the audience, all the speakers.
Okay, Bablu. Now Hana, Mukti, yeah.
Okay. So I think the question by Samina Lutfa, I think I'll direct it to Sumon. I think he's a better person to answer that. He has written about this quite extensively. The first question was from Shapon Adnan, and he asked about the petitions from the Bengali settlers. It's a very good question, and the thing is that Mukti Chakma and I have been only looking at the Adivashi complaints so far. We have not, I don't know if Mukti has, but I certainly have not seen any of the complaints from the Bengalis. So thank you for that information. It'll actually help us a lot in our research. Having said that, we do know that since the 2016 amendment was done and the terms practice was introduced in that amendment, that the Bengali settlers have not been very happy, and not just, I don't mean the settlers themselves, but also the forces that are behind the settlers. They have been mobilizing the settlers to oppose this amendment. I mean, Shapon Bhai, you know that about very well, but it will be very interesting to look at those complaints from the Bengalis that were made before the amendment. And we all know that the settlers who were brought there were also victims themselves to some extent, and it's the forces that work behind that really, the militarization and the state that controls this. That's where the real problem lies. But ever since the 2016 amendment, there's been a lot of pushback against the functioning of the Land Commission. To answer Firoz's question, about resistance from the center. I think, Feroz, you probably missed Mahmudul Sumon's presentation. This conference will be, we will put it online. So I think it'll be very good for you to listen to Sumon's first presentation, because he talks a lot about, the nationalistic kind of discourses that have been built up, and not just by by the state, but also people who would thinkers and scholars who we would like to think are progressive people have also thought about the Chittagong Hill Tracts in a very that kind of military lens, and the security and sovereignty of the state. So that's some of the things that Sumon talked about in his presentation. To answer Rosa's question, yes, it is definitely a limitation here, because we're all talking about the Chittagong Hill Tracts. We admit that. We did invite someone to generally talk about the indigenous issues in Bangladesh, that they could not make it, and they only let us know at the very last moment that they couldn't come. But also, so yes, that I will say is a limitation here. And so I think for Samina Lutfa's question, I will go to Sumon for that.
Okay. So yeah, Anurag, if you have a quick, if you want to share any quick thoughts, you will do that, and then Sumon, you have specific responsibility attributed by Hana upon you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Actually, in case of Bangladesh, because the indigeneity issue is more politicized, actually, as a PhD researcher, despite this is not my area of focus, but from my understanding, based on the existing literature, actually, the issue of indigenous people fits within the international legal framework, because indigenous people are those people who are culturally distinct, who live in particular geographical region, and who have been living in that region before the establishment of the present independent state. And another criteria is that they are not the dominant in the existing political system.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you. Professor Mahmudul Sumon.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Samina, for that question. Actually, this is a question that is really difficult to answer, and I wouldn't say that I have a ready answer to that. But generally, I would say that I've always, as a researcher and as someone who also worked on this issue, I've thought about indigeneity as from the perspective or lens of constructivism, which means that there's no objective truth about identity. It is a construction, and if that captures the imagination of a lot of people, then it has certain validities and importance. So while I agree that some scholars, even in India, where even anthropologists were outright saying that the term indigenous is not applicable for countries like India, of course. But I have always tried to stay away from that sort of argument and thought in terms of constructivism, and looked at this identity issue from the perspective of transnational governmentality, if you like. So I think, and that is what has happened in Bangladesh in the 1990s. So in the early 90s, we have seen this development. Before that, for example, in the 80s, there was no mention of indigeneity as such. But I would also like to add that despite the fact that the government has repeatedly discouraged to use this word, it is very interesting and very ambiguous as well to see that there are certain legal instruments in the country which continues to use terms like Aboriginal in Bangladesh. So I think my response is that I would rather say that the government has been very careless about outright saying that the term is a misnomer. Rather, I would think that it could have, there could have been a lot of discussion about it, and there could have been a lot of contextualization of this term in Bangladesh, something that we haven't seen from the government, and no intention at all. So that is one thing that I would say. And on the question of representation of Adivasi people from the plain lands, it is unfortunate that as a researcher, I have started my work with the plainland Adivasis actually. So, but somehow for this panel, I thought that I should write something new. So I went for this particular essay. But of course, there are people who are definitely working on indigenous people, quote unquote, indigenous people of the plains in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Professor Sumon. Mukti, do you want to share any of your thoughts in a quick minute? Mukti Chapman.
I think Hana said it all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a big relief. We just want to wrap up now because we have to rush for the next session. Anyway, it was a very thought-provoking session indeed. We have talked about discourses. We have talked about specific issues. We have talked about unequal matrix of power relations and complicated relationship between the ethnic, like the indigenous people and their big other, the Bengalis. So yes, but yes, we are acknowledging Rosa Mendoza's concern that, yeah, the session could have more accommodative and it should have something, a paper or two on the Adivasis of the plain land. Because people are much needed, that is much needed, and the issue shouldn't be hegemonized with the CHT discourses only. It shouldn't be hegemonized with the CHT discourses only. Anyway, but we tried, but maybe in any coming venture we will do that. Thank you very much to all of you for your patience, and thank you for thanks to the presenter for the fantastic papers and for the discussion. Yeah, thanks to the floor. We are closing the session now.